Started.
How many of us are there?
What?
How many of us are there?
Most of us.
Okay.
The important ones. All right, Gary, let's get started.
Yes,
Oh,
Commissioners, this is the monthly meeting of the County Budget Committee. If we can start with introductions, if you don't mind, I'll do it. I'll call your name, and if you could please say who you are. Ken.
Clackamas County Commissioner Ken Humberston.
Jim.
Jim Bernard, Clackamas County Chair.
Sonia.
Sonia Fisher, Clackamas County Commission.
Sean.
Sean Caldwell, citizen member.
Ann.
Ann Lee, citizen member.
Wilda.
Wilda Park, citizen member.
Tom.
Tom Feely, citizen member.
Jan.
Ann Lee, citizen member.
Paul.
Paul Savas, Clackamas County Commissioner.
And our staff support, Drenda.
Brenda Howard, Commission Staff Manager.
Elizabeth.
Elizabeth Comfort, Interim Finance Director with the county.
Sandra.
Good afternoon, Sandra Montoya, Budget Manager.
Christina.
Good afternoon, Christina Twilliger, Clerk to the Board.
We have Rich Marvin and Garrett Teague from Public and Government Affairs who are helping with the recording today, and I'm Gary Schmidt, County Administrator. I will introduce Elizabeth again, our Interim Finance Director. Interim Finance Director. Elizabeth, if you could please kick off the rest of the meeting, and Commissioner Schrader is also here. Go ahead, Elizabeth.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. Budget Committee for Clackamas County, thank you for your time again. This is month 2 of our 6-month adventure into having monthly Budget Committee meetings. We've set this up so we can really dive into some topics, be strategic in our thinking, learn monthly how things are going, get a pulse, get our fingers on the pulse of potentially what COVID is doing to our financials. As that information comes up, we want to share that with you. So this is an opportunity really to continue the good communication that we started last spring at our annual Budget Committee meetings. I am going to turn this meeting over to Sandra Montoya. She's our budget manager for the county, and she is going to walk us through our material that we have available that you all should have received last Tuesday as well. And if anybody needs that, please let me know and I'll shoot that off immediately to you. So Sandra?
All right, well, thank you very much. Good afternoon, Commissioners and Budget Committee members. We're very pleased at the packet that we've been able to produce for you because we believe it's very relevant information as well as being responsive to the requests that we've been receiving. The last 4 pages of the document are recurring, so I'm going to start backwards, but those are recurring pages that you will be seeing updated from month to month. So things like the vacancy savings report, the FTE vacancy report, and the overtime usage. Those you will see updated every month when we meet, and we hope that you will have time to review those in advance of the meeting and ask any questions if you have those. In this month's packet, you also have the COVID recovery support letter that was initially drafted by staff and sent out to all of the members, and then we received some input. Thank you very much to the members who provided input. As you read the letter, you'll see we incorporated your recommendations into that letter. So that makes up the last 4 pages of your packet. And now we're going to roll forward to the 3 new pages that we have for you, which we believe is where you want to spend the bulk of the time. So with that, I'm going to roll forward to page number 2, and I'm going to share my screen so we're all on the same page. Okay. So the first or the second page of your packet, but it's the first discussion page, is the report that shows what happened in 2008. So the 2008 recession, what happened to our property tax, and what we've done is we've highlighted where the negative impacts were seen, where we experienced those, and to what degree. So the first column that we get to is the assessed value, the annual growth, and that we want to highlight is we didn't see a decrease in assessed value growth for a couple of years into the recession. That is important because we want this time around in this recession, we may again not see the impact of COVID-19 on our assessed value growth right away. And so you will see that mimicked in our forecast on the next page when we get to it. Where we did see an immediate impact is in the yellow highlighted column that says collection rate. That's the property tax collection, and that is the first indicator that we believe we will begin to see a decrease due to COVID-19. That will happen around the November of 2020 timeframe. So when our first property tax payments are due to come in, we believe that just as in 2008, we will see a decrease in the collection rate. So all of the reports where you see us saying things like in December of 2020, we will have our first indication of how severe the COVID impact is. This is what we are referring to, and that is the collection rate of property tax, where it's normally up in the 94 and 95%, maybe something lower than that rate. And that is when we will start to be able to make some better projections of future impacts. The third column is the delinquency collection rate. That's the blue highlight here, where the collections, the delinquency rate had been or has been historically down in the 2% range. In the 2008 recession, about 2 years after, we saw an increase in the collection rate, meaning that people were delinquent, and then it took a couple of years for us to start recovering those delinquent revenues. So again, this is the 2008 historical view of property tax impact, which again is our primary revenue source in the general fund. So any questions on this page?
I don't have a question. I thank you for looking at that. I know I raised that a few meetings ago. We struggled with it during the 80s. So I knew it was a real thing, but I'm glad we're looking at it so we're not surprised later.
So the very next page applies those assumptions. So basically, and you'll see the color scheme that plays through in each of these. So you'll see the green bar area, the yellow bar, the blue bar area. It's because we applied the assumptions from the 2008 recession onto our current day projections. And we modeled 4 scenarios, and we'll walk through those kind of quickly. Scenario 1 is what we budgeted. So you'll see that because we didn't know what the COVID impact was when the budget was being built in March and April of this year, there was minimal COVID impact that was projected. You'll see that in this 2021 column, we had a balanced budget, but the out years, the forecast years, do show a decrease. So they do show a negative future projection. Again, this is minimal COVID impacts because we had no idea what we would be in store for or the duration of the impact. Scenario 2 is what we modeled last month. Scenario 2 has, again, minimal COVID impacts, and the change, so the difference between this deficit in year 1 and this positive number in year 1 of the second scenario, that is us applying an outcome budgeting methodology. And the outcome budgeting methodology doesn't mean that there wouldn't be reductions. What it means is that the approach that we used at the budget, it would be based on the county's, the performance Clackamas priorities. And from that, we would roll out how much each department had at the beginning. So rather than having an iterative budget process, we would tell departments what they had available at the beginning of the process, again, based on the county's priorities. Scenario number 3 then takes a look at if we apply moderate COVID impacts, then what does the future deficit look like? And that, in year one, we would estimate about 3.2 million of a deficit. And you can see in the out years, that number stays relatively stable based on our assumptions. The last scenario is what we believe is the worst case, using some of the revenue indicators that the state is currently using. So some of the worst case at the state level, say a 25% negative impact, and those are the numbers that then we begin to apply in scenario number 4. At this point, we don't have any idea, to be truthful, whether scenario 3 or scenario 4 is where we are at. As you know, we've been saying, is in December is really where we're going to have the first indication of how bad things will be on our Oregon economy, and specifically Clackamas County. So I wanted one check to see if there's any questions on the forecast that we put together. Here at the top is the 4 scenarios graphically, and want to make sure that I leave plenty of time for your questions and any follow-up that needs to be done.
I have a question, Sandra. The state economist talked about the economy turning around in 2024, but I see that you still go out beyond that with the deficit. What made you determine the deficit would go out a couple more years?
So I believe that I read that report a little bit after we put these scenarios together, and the information that we had been looking at said that the recessionary recovery might be in the 4 to 7 year range. And so it just seemed reasonable to extend it for this 5-year period until we had more information.
If you could please raise your chat hand if you wish to speak. And Chair Bernard, would you lead this part of the meeting, please?
Yes, I'm sorry, my mic was off again. I said, Sean, you're up.
All right, thank you. I have a few questions on these charts, and I want to thank you for the information. This is really, really helpful. I wanted to ask about what the assumptions are if we look like we were going along with scenario 2, and that was actually what was panning out. That would mean we would have a difference in the general fund of what, something a little less than $2 million for next year? Am I seeing that right?
Let me make this a little bit larger. And so then you're talking about scenario 2.
Yeah, the difference between, well, scenario 1 and scenario 2 is something over $1 million. Does that trend out in the difference in following years? In other words, if I'm looking at scenario 1, we would have to cut $2.1 million in order to balance the budget in 21-22. Is that correct?
Yes.
And then 2.8 million in year 2. Is 2.8 million based on the assumption that we took a cut in year 1, or is that simply trending out that difference?
Well, we've built every year on the previous base. And hold on just 1 second.
So if we cut 2.1 in 21-22, I'm assuming we would not need to cut 2.8 again, that 2.8 would trend off of what we had already done in 21-22.
Yes, that is a fact.
Okay, thank you. That's very helpful information. The other question I had is, this is looking at general fund. I want to keep on people's radar screen that any changes in state revenue, and I'm thinking specifically of community corrections dollars, mental health dollars, anything coming through Medicaid, that's going to impact the budget. So the question isn't just general fund. So any radical budget changes that the state makes in streaming through revenue to the counties is also going to hit in addition to the $2 million for next year.
That is correct. Right. We're looking at the general fund because that's our property taxes that come in typically, that we have more discretion with those funds. And you're correct, Sean, you know, for the other state and federal grant funding that we typically receive for other departments' needs, those programs would need to be looked at as those reductions come in. And I believe I heard they're looking at a 3%, 2 to 3% reduction at this time at the state level.
And actually, the board could decide to supplant some of those cuts with general fund too. Right.
Somebody's phone.
Sorry, my daughter's telling me.
I'm sorry.
Did you hear what I said, or did I get?
Can you repeat that, Tom?
Oh, I was just going to say, I mean, the board can always choose to supplement or fill behind some of those state cuts with general fund. So
right, it's not as simple as
it's
dollar for dollar.
not. I mean, you can look at just the general fund, but you're really missing a lot of other. Elizabeth, that's kind of the conversation I had with you about, you know, following the general fund money throughout the budget, because I think there's a habit of once it leaves the general fund, oh, it's not general fund, but you know, it really is.
Yeah. Well, and the other part of the question is a lot of the discussion around outcome budgeting is going to be what the priorities are. And some of those priorities might be funded with state money. So then that calls up into question, do you want to use general fund instead? So all of that to say, this is all one big picture. It's not individual silos. So, okay, thank you.
Let me call on you before you start talking. Paul, you're up. Then Tom.
Yeah, appreciate that. So, Sandra, if I heard you correctly, as you were going through those scenarios, 1 through 5, it seems like we're focusing on the revenue side, and you know, the context is, you know, accurate, you know, with collection of revenues or difficulty collecting and so on. So I get all of that. But we're not spending a lot of time talking about the expense side. So is the assumption that we just adjust as needed, as opposed to, you know, anticipate and glide into or make a cut that gets us to a point to where those expenditures are not exceeding the revenues, and it's more strategic. So that's kind of an overall question. But I'm really, the other one I want to ask, and I'll ask it at the same time, and then maybe you can just answer them both. What happened in the forecasting that changed the outlook between scenario 1 and 2 so dramatically? Was there new money found, or was there what's the significant change there?
So, well, I don't have cuts to specific programs. So scenario 1 and scenario 2 doesn't, we didn't identify down to the program level. What we did in scenario 1 was say, this is what we are projecting, or what was projected at the time of budget. And then scenario 2 says, if we backed into what is needed, this scenario 2 is what, and when we use the outcome-based budgeting consistently in each of those years, this is what we could project the future to look like. But it doesn't speak to where those cuts would be necessary. It just assumes that we would be able to make the hard decisions to make reductions along the way.
And
oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, and Commissioner Savas, for your earlier question, what we're looking at is with scenario 2 is getting to a sustainable budget in that first year. Because we're still, we want to demonstrate that we can, but it is going to come at a cost to get to a sustainable budget in the first year. And that's where, you know, the outcomes-based budgeting really comes into play, aligning those with our performance Clackamas. We can, and we've talked about, you know, last spring, we talked about doing the 2 to 3 year glide path. So those, you know, that's still on the table. We want to demonstrate what it would take if we did the sustainable in the first one. So scenario 1 demonstrates what if we continue with those assumptions with the increase in costs over the next few years without tightening down the revenue. And you're right, we are looking at the revenue over the expenditures that we already know. So we're taking in what we know, because we can't project exactly how the expenditures are going to play in the future, but we can use experience to kind of give us that guide. So we're focusing on the revenue to tie to those expenditures.
Yeah, I appreciate the approach, and then looking at the trends in the graphs, it makes sense that the approach you're taking in there in scenario 2 probably more closely matches the conservative one forecast from the state numbers, as Sandra was talking about. So yeah, thank you for that.
I was reading the screen, it said press and hold the space bar, and my mic would unmute, but it didn't. So Tom and then Wilda.
Thank you. I have a question about scenario 3 and 4. Did you use or not use the outcome-based budgeting model for those years?
Well, so we have not used it.
Okay, well,
that would be our recommendation, but last month there was a lot of questions about, well, what would the deficit look like?
Right, and I appreciate seeing it. Yeah.
Yes.
It's good to see it and know that there's a way to alleviate it, although those are big numbers.
They are very big numbers.
Scenario for big numbers. So, all right, thank you.
Wilda.
Thanks. So help me understand. I want to make sure I'm understanding all the terminologies and how things get to where they get. So performance Clackamas outcomes are the goals of the county. So we don't know what those are going to be in advance. So, you know, it's kind of interesting. But how do those, there's a couple of questions. How do those correlate with the results of the county survey that says we value this, we value this, we value this, that the citizens provide for us? So how do those two things interface with each other? And then those are likely to change at least every couple of years. And so it seems, I like the idea of the outcomes budget. You know, you budget for what you want your result to be, but how can we project that 3 to 5 years out, and do those things intersect with each other? You know, and would that also be, I guess my third thought on that is, would that also be a cause for looking at a biennial budget rather than an annual budget?
That's a lot of questions. I'm gonna with Elizabeth and Gary. Do you guys want to take a stab?
So we have our new chart of accounts that we've been talking about, and it aligns with our managing for results, the MFR that the county has done a full one county effort on. And our next step in this is to tie each of those programs in the MFR, those results, to the performance Clackamas initiatives, because we already have those established. So the performance, our priorities for the county have been established, and we want to tie our MFR programs to that. And you're absolutely spot on. We have a new survey that we just received the results in June, which we shared with you. Sandra sent out last week.
Yeah.
And we do need to, you know, hear and respond to what our folks are sharing with us, what are priorities to them. And so then our next step is also going to be making sure that we are aligning with them as well. The outcomes-based budgeting is a 2 to 3 year endeavor. you know, this first year is really getting our infrastructure in play that we can respond then with a budget that demonstrates those priorities. And so next year, as we look to what our goals are defined, you know, within each of those performance measures, how that ties to our budget. So next year is the year that will really be tying those, the responses and our priorities to the budget.
And so the new software will start off with managing for results and then continue along those lines. Obviously, it'll take a little while to have that all sort of play out and see where we need to adjust it.
Yes, yes. And I believe Sandra also responded that looking at a biennial budget for the county is something that she and her team are going to look at. There's several other counties and entities that do use it or have used it or looking at it. So we have a good resource pool to study to see if this is something that would be beneficial for the county. In fact, this fall, there is a class through the Oregon Government Finance Officers Association on biennial budgeting that we'll both be taking at minimum to see what kind of case study they're using and what we can glean from that.
Yeah, well, and I think Jan Lee mentioned that the city of Sandy uses biennial budget, and the city of Milwaukee also does a biennial budget. So, you know, might be local resources. I know they're a lot different dollar-wise, but yeah. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Jim, you're on mute if you're saying anything.
All right, I said, are there any other questions? I don't see any. You guys want to go ahead and proceed?
Yes, okay. So then the last page that we have is again our discussion of sustainable budget and then the outcomes budgeting methodology, and just wanted to keep this on the forefront. And because we've had some discussions and some questions on the difference between a balanced budget versus a sustainable budget, we thought it would be helpful to just get that definition out and make sure we were all on the same page. And so I wanted to just share the state budget law requires us to have a balanced budget. A balanced budget can make use of reserves. Sustainable budget is one notch above, if you will. It raises the bar of budgeting best practices, and it says you align recurring revenue with recurring expenditures and any extraordinary items. So whether that be like settlement of a lawsuit or property sales, things that are one time, and that would also include savings from one year to the next, those sort of revenues then go to one-time projects or to build up your reserves, which the reserve levels are crucial for us. Clackamas County has a AAA bond rating, which I can share is a really difficult accomplishment to achieve. In my 25 years of work, I've never worked for an organization previously that had a AAA bond rating. And I can tell you that that has been the pinnacle of my goals in every position that I've had. So to come to an organization that has a AAA bond rating is a huge deal. And it's something that we want to treasure and hold on to. But that also means having really good, maintaining, I should say, very good management and financial practices, and a sustainable budget would be right in line with that practice. So again, a sustainable budget takes into account long-term expenditures, and it sets aside for capital infrastructure. So things like replacing systems, technology systems, setting aside for the pension, doing things like the capital infrastructure. I believe a Budget Committee member, Feely, had concerns over the fleet fund and having enough for replacements. So a good, sound, sustainable budget practice would be setting aside for those things. Even if that means that you have to reduce the core in order to have sustainable budget practices for the long haul. So really, long and short, a sustainable budget practice says we're in it for the long haul. We want to be here not just for the next 5 or 10 years, but actually for future generations. So how do we set up sound practices today that will maintain that? Then rolling forward into the budgeting for outcomes methodology, just in the research that we have done, the budgeting for outcomes methodology really takes a look at a resident perspective and says, here's the priorities of my county, and here's what my county is doing for me in order to meet those needs. The example that I gave, and I'm not sure if I gave it last month, but a very popular standard for like public safety would be the number of public safety officers per 1,000. And that is a really good performance measure, but the average resident doesn't understand what that means. They have no clue. How does that pertain to where I live and what, the safety of my family? But a performance measurement that says we're going to respond within 7 minutes of a call, that is personal and that relates to the resident, and it's something that they can understand. And so those are the slight differences in methodology. I like to liken it to, it depends on whose glasses you're wearing. So the budgeting for outcomes methodology really puts on the resident's glasses and says, this is what my county is doing for me. And it starts to boil it down and say, we're not going to do everything, because to do everything really thins the soup. But we're going to focus on the priorities of the county and do those well. So with that, I wanted to open up this item for discussion.
And if
Before we move on, I just want to thank you, Elizabeth, and you, Sandra, for that AAA rating. I think that in these challenging times, your work, your presentation to, is it Moody's?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Obviously was outstanding. And I want to make sure that you both here, thank you, and your staff, thank you very much for your work. And go ahead, Elizabeth.
Oh, thank you, Chair. Yeah. Oh, I just wanted to touch on what Sandra was saying too earlier about, being intentional in our future processes and policies. One of the things we, as a budget committee, you have highlighted is that we really need to look at our policies. And so as we're looking for our agenda items, being very intentional and strategic about those over the next 4 months, we want to bring our policies, and one of them is the reserve policy. And how do we use one-time revenues? Because there's a lot that can play together on that. So I want to make sure that you know that we still have that on our radar, and we're actively looking at our policies, what needs to be addressed and timing, and what do we feel needs to be moved to the top so that it can be very instrumental in our immediate planning, which I believe is the the reserve policy for the county.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Tom, and then Paul.
Thank you, Elizabeth. It's a perfect lead-in for what I was going to say. I did work for an employer, had a AAA bond rating for a number of years, and it's not a one-time thing. It's something that you've got to work at, and you've got to prove to them that you're continuing to manage your finances in a responsible manner. And I think one of the real keys, and I've mentioned it before, so I'm not going to harp on it, but written financial policies. So it's just what Elizabeth was talking about. You know, you can steal other people's. It doesn't need to, you know, start from scratch. But those are the things that the investors and the bond rating agencies really want to see, and they want to see that you follow them as well.
Yes.
And they, in fact, when the board follows them, the departments follow them, you're committing good financial management just by following your own policies. They're really critically important, and they keep you out of trouble using one-time funds for one-time purposes. I mean, my last 2 employers got in the habit of using them for ongoing expenditures, and you know, you come to the end of the run and you're in trouble.
Yeah.
So anyway, I just wanted to point that out. And then nowhere, and I've mentioned this before, is discussion of potential new revenue when it's needed. Like if we're not meeting our objective in a particular area and the department has an idea for increasing revenue. I mean, I'm thinking like the sheriff's levy and things like that. I just think we need to have a little opening for that. It doesn't mean the board has to do it, but it's like part of the equation. It should be part of the equation. All right, that's it.
Thank you, Tom. And Paul?
Yeah, well, I want to make sure that my comments earlier about the glide path was not a suggestion that we change the model, but it was just more of a comparative. I do want to point out, just validate, maybe just say it a little bit differently, but I really appreciate how Sandra laid that out. And I guess I would say to during our bond rating review and all that what we conveyed to them was basically the scenario 2 approach, the outcomes approach, is what we conveyed to them that gave them the confidence that we were going to manage ourselves in a sustainable fashion. Is that correct?
We demonstrated our current budget that we're in for 2021, which is pretty close to that sustainable budget, or the outcomes, you know, just really matching our expenditures with our revenues. It's a very tight budget.
Yeah, and I know that Jim probably remembers. Martha wasn't on the board yet at the time, but when I came on the board in 2011, we had no strategic plan or MFR, and we had no reserve policy and no contingency policy and no money, no reserves really. So we managed, fortunately, to put all those in place, and I think we're better for it today. So it's all to say you can't do this overnight. It takes years of commitment and discipline to get where we are today. Thank you.
Any other questions? All right, are you gonna go ahead and proceed?
Okay, well, that is actually all that we had today for discussion. I think the future, as Elizabeth mentioned, our goal is that for September, we will bring the reserve policies. I believe we have 2 that we are working on at this point, and that is what we have for the agenda for September. And I wanted to share that just so you have something to look forward to.
And if I can tag onto that too, what we hope to have next month is the beginning of our next budget calendar as well. We'll start building that together. You know, the county staff as well as you, the budget committee, can be aware of and start planning for how we're going to lay out the next future fiscal year.
All right, well then, thank you very much for your presentation. It was very informative. So any additional questions before we leave?
Nice job. Thank you.
Thank you. And if I could just one last thing, it would be horrible of me and horribly neglectful of me to not say thank you to my staff. We have a tremendous budget staff, and the county should be very proud of them, and I know that you are, and I am. Coming in 2 months new, there's no way that I would be able to do it without them and without Elizabeth's leadership. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Elizabeth, and thank you, Citizen Budget Committee members. Have a great afternoon.
You too.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
All right,
Gary?
The next session's at 2:30 and our staff is not here yet. Would you like to take a short break?
Yes.
Okay.
See you at 2:30. Thank you. time. Let's get going.
All right, next, commissioners, is noise ordinance amendments. You discussed this previously. This is bringing it back to you. We have County Council, the Sheriff's Office, Transportation and Development to present. But Nate Boderman from County Council's office will be the lead. Go ahead, Nate.
Great, thank you. Good afternoon. Thanks for having me here. As Gary indicated, what's up for discussion today really is a continuation of a conversation that we've had around a number of changes to the county's noise ordinance. So we're bringing it back to you now. This is a short session, and I'm sure we'll have several questions on this. So I'll try and keep my portion brief and move through the materials quickly. So as you may recall, we have had 2 policy sessions previously on this matter. And as I tried to highlight in the staff report materials, really the focus of those discussions centered around 2 issues in particular. The first issue being the implementation of a more flexible, subjective standard for determining noise violations, which really signaled a move away from the use of noise meters and any objective measurement of noise for purposes of determining those violations. The second issue involved changes to the noise variance procedures, specifically increasing the internal and external public notice associated with those variances that are approved. So at our last session on this, I'll note that there was unanimous support for the majority of changes that were proposed. These changes are summarized in the staff report materials and are specifically around the changes to adopt the more flexible and subjective noise standards, like I mentioned previously. They are changes to the fines associated with noise violations and other various housekeeping type changes, really to clean up some of the inconsistencies that we identified in the ordinance and to help with just general administration of the noise ordinance itself. So I guess at this point, unless there are specific questions on those issues, is it safe to assume that everyone is still okay with those proposed changes? Because if so, perhaps the rest of our time can be spent resolving the remaining issues around the noise variance.
Okay.
Yeah, I was ready to go. I like the changes.
So I don't have any questions. I'm ready to go. I like the changes too.
I'm okay.
Okay. So generally hearing consensus around those, I'll call them previously endorsed changes. That's how I identified them in the staff report. So if anything pops in your head, please feel free to ask, but just in the interest of time, I'll go ahead and move on to the variance piece then.
Well, Paul just raised his hand.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I apologize for being a little bit slow on the draw here. So the second part, if you could just cover that again. The first part was going from the objective, getting away from the objective standard of having the noise decibel to a subjective standard, right?
Correct, yes.
So I recall that. So could you just repeat that second part again for me one more time?
Sure. The second part was then associated changes to the fines, whereas currently under the noise ordinance, there is a provision to or a penalty up to $500 per violation. We discussed in previous sessions that there was some confusion perhaps because there's a separate violation for noise violations within parks that was substantially lower. So what we decided to do was to create a graduated fine schedule, the first offense being $150, second offense being $300, and the third offense being $500. And so it's just clarifying in the fine schedule, excuse me, what those penalties would be. So that was the second part. And then the third part was housekeeping changes. So in the course of updating the ordinance, we identified some inconsistencies, tried to clean those up, and a few other things that we highlighted in the staff report that would help with just general administration. We don't characterize these as policy changes, but they are, again, administrative cleanups and sort of low-level improvements to the ordinance, if you will.
Right, and from reviewing the board packet, what I gleaned out of that was, and that is the sheriff's office who would basically be the enforcement arm for that. At least that's what the fee schedule showed. So code enforcement's role is what?
Well, currently currently the sheriff's office enforces the noise ordinance. That's who is vested with that authority. There's no change to that as part of this proposal. And so enforcement would remain with the sheriff's office. Now, here in a moment, we'll talk about variances, but that's a separate issue entirely. I think to your point more specifically, it is and would remain with the sheriff's office, the job of enforcing the noise code.
Okay, so the answer to my question as far as code enforcement, as far as enforcing any noise violations, code enforcement would have no role whatsoever.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so that brings us to the variance piece then. And for those noises that would otherwise violate our code, the variance process is available, and that's just a departure from the thresholds that we've established in the code as part of the noise ordinance. Most of the discussion around variances that we had engaged in previously was really around the fact that there was no notice currently required under the code. And that's either internally to other departments within the county or externally to the public, particularly where the variances were approved. So in the last session on this, what we presented to you were changes to the ordinance that required the applicant to post notice on the site and to identify an individual that would be available to answer any questions about the activities associated with that approved variance. This approach has been used in other jurisdictions and appears, at least to staff, to provide a low cost and effective means of conveying the necessary information that would most concern those potentially affected by the noise happening on that particular site. The idea being that hopefully we can address some of those issues, or at least the private parties could address some of those issues at the source and before they sort of spiraled into larger problems, so to speak. Additionally, at the last session, there was continued concerns about the means by which notice would be provided, again, to other affected departments within the county and to county administration. So in response, what we did was we worked with the sheriff's office to update some forms, decision templates to help guide the decision-making to conform to the specific criteria that's set out in code and to help ensure that the decisions were routed properly. In addition, DTD actually updated some of their permit materials to provide customers additional clarification around the variance process. We went ahead and included those in the materials as well. But beyond that, it was our recommendation at the time and the recommendation of Administrator Schmidt to really keep the internal notice and the cooperation piece out of the code and to address it really at an internal policy level. And that was to retain the flexibility to adjust that policy and practice as necessary, and without the full-blown process typically associated with a full code amendment. Of course, there's multiple readings and all of that when you're amending the code. So that was the thinking behind that. So the result of that is that the proposed language that's presented in the packet to the variance section remains unchanged from the last time this was presented to you. And again, that's for a couple of reasons. First, the changes to internal notice, as I mentioned, can be handled entirely outside of the code and at a policy level. Second, and perhaps more notable, was while working with the sheriff's office on these updates, they expressed a strong preference really to get out of the business of processing these variances altogether. So Captain Strangfield's here. He can provide some more context on this request to you here in a moment, if you'd like. But this obviously opens up a host of other issues, which really in many ways are unrelated to the vast majority of the changes to the noise ordinance that I've just discussed. And so it was with this development with the sheriff's office that really prompted staff's recommendation to you today, which is to separate out the noise variance issue so that we can engage in that discussion on its own. And really to move forward with the majority of the proposed changes to the noise ordinance that to this point really have had unanimous support and have been non-controversial. So I'll just say, to the extent that you want to engage on the noise variance question here today, again, Captain Strangfield from the Sheriff's Office is here. Dan Johnson, Cheryl Bell from DTD are available if you have specific questions pertaining to the noise variance. So I'll offer that. But before I turn it over, I'll just reiterate that with the time that we've been allotted and the issue, the way this issue has transpired, my recommendation here would be to move forward with the changes described, and that we can come back to you at a later session to specifically isolate and discuss the issues around the noise variance only. So with that, I guess we're sort of at a fork in the road in the presentation, depending on which way you want to go. So I'll leave it at that and sort of take my cues from you, but happy to answer any questions and move the discussion in the direction you'd like to go.
I don't see anything.
I had my
Oh,
hand
wait.
up.
Excuse me, Ken and Paul.
Thank you.
All right.
Yeah, I'm good to go forward with the things that you've already presented and changes for the subjective aspect of the noise ordinance. No problem there. It gives the sheriff's department the opportunity to make a subjective judgment and not have to call a sergeant with a noise meter, especially for a loud party and those kinds of things. And that's really what was the driving force behind that aspect of it, and also increasing the fines so that it's painful if people violate. The other issue that you are suggesting we bring back at a later date for more discussion with the sheriff's department and whoever else, that arose from Commissioner Savis's observation about a construction issue that started at about 3:30 in the morning, and they weren't supposed to start till about 6 o'clock in the morning. Mm-hmm. And that was, clearly somebody not following the rules, and the consequences for not following the rules were minuscule. So I'd like to be sure that there is a posting so that there is a contact person. If there's a violation, we can discuss separately whether it's going to be the sheriff's department or one of our other departments to deal with the enforcement end. And then the sanctions should be significant so that people will be discouraged from violating the agreement. So in terms of what you have proposed, I'm good to go.
Okay.
Well, to build on Commissioner Humberston's comments, just one small minor correction. Good memory for the most part. Yeah, they were supposed to start at 3 o'clock in the morning. Who would ever thought of that? But they actually started at 1:45.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that.
Something like that. All I knew was it was started at 1:45, and it was several days of that actually. And what's happened since, and I want to give thanks to Mary Rathke because she has done her best to keep us apprised of the applications that have rolled through, that have gone through the sheriff's department since that point in time. And I have noticed that no matter whether they do notice or not, that the sheriff's office has approved them, even though they didn't do the notice or so on. So I'm not critical at this point. Nothing's bad occurred. So I don't want anyone to think that I'm trying to hit the sheriff's department. But when this all occurred, this all sprung up. I happened to ride up in the elevator with Sheriff Roberts and the undersheriff and the chief deputy at the time. And, by the time we made it up to the top floor, we had unanimous agreement in the elevator that, this probably shouldn't go through the sheriff's office. So I'm in agreement. It needs, I think it's more lands and that other guy, that Dan Johnson guy. Yeah. So I see him nod his head up and down. No, it's sideways, I guess. So the question is, if it doesn't land in the sheriff's department, and these construction things are more related, frankly, to DTD's work to some degree because they do the permitting, and I'd like to at least get some kind of a idea of what the people on this meeting think about how we handle this if it's not the sheriff's department, because the levers are in DT. As I learned from that last experience, the levers are in DTD's office or department.
Just a second. Sonia?
Did somebody need to answer Paul's comment or?
Yeah, Dan had his hand up.
Yeah, let's finish that,
Oh.
and then I have a different question.
Good afternoon, Commission. In regards to Commissioner Savas's question, I guess I'd be interested in kind of the data the Sheriff's Office might be able to provide of the total number. And I think, Nate, you had this number yesterday. I think they have, what was there, 25 to 30 variances a year in total? I mean, there isn't a lot of them.
Yeah, it was about 25 to 35 variances over the past few years.
I guess I'd be interested to know, because you talk about those variances, and they give those variances for a variety of different purposes. Some are construction related, and the one that happened next to your house was construction related. And we talked through that, and a lot of those deal with the fact that they're, not to get too deep into this, but they deal with concrete. And they deal with the fact when you have temperature spans that are in the hundreds of degrees during a week, they have to schedule that concrete delivery early in the morning to get that concrete processed and set in time. But I guess I'd just be interested in that number, of that 25 to 30, how many were construction related? Because the other ones, I'm not sure what kind of expertise we could bring to that discussion above and beyond what the Sheriff's Office may have, but it'd be good to look at that data.
Yeah, and if I can respond, Dan, if they're saying they're going to start at 3 o'clock, they should start at 3 o'clock, not 1:45, right? And they thought that maybe the weather might be a factor, but it turned out the weather was not that much of a factor on every one of those days, just one of those days. But it went on for a week, and they said they do notice, but they didn't do notice. So it's not necessarily that they get a variance or they don't get a variance. It's that they actually follow the rules and do the notice and give opportunity. And also the other thing we discovered was that the Board of County Commissioners, by design, has an opportunity to review it. And we never had that. There was not the time. For example, the Sheriff's Office could approve it on a Tuesday and they could start construction on a Wednesday. And so the 2-week period for the board to exercise its opportunity to intervene wasn't even allowed in the structure. So I don't know how that is done administratively. That number one, our ability to review or that application or variance or appeal it or whatever it may be, the structure ought to be there. And by the way, the rules on the form ought to be followed. If they can't do it and they can't prove they did it, they shouldn't get the variance. It's not about just checking the boxes to make the form look good. They need to follow the rules. Them being, in this case, the construction companies.
So Gary, I'm going to go to you after Shane looked like he was going to respond to one of Paul's questions.
I was raising my hand for Shane, actually. So.
Oh, okay.
Well, thank you. Thank you for letting me speak today, Commissioners. Much appreciated. Thank you, Chair Bernard. Variances, yeah, it's a position of the Sheriff's Office that, we're happy to be the public safety nexus and respond to these complaints as needed and do the enforcement. And we absolutely support the change for the objective standard to the subjective standard, giving us those tools in the field to adjust those situations, much as Commissioner Hummers has said, those loud party complaints in the middle of the night that we need to address and use as a tool to solve problems as needed. But as the enforcement of doing that, we shouldn't be then the administrators of granting variances. That evaluation should be done by a different agency, checks and balances, and it shouldn't be the Sheriff's Office who's being asked to enforce things to be the administrators of granting variances to the noise ordinance. I'll tell you that as currently written with the code, we've taken a stance of not granting variances. We're denying variances if they're just an event it's just like a wedding or a planning event and people just sending stuff in. That number with COVID happening over this last summer has drastically dropped. I'm not seeing those come through as much as we have before. But there is a noise ordinance in place and we're asking people just to follow the noise ordinance. The one that does come up for evaluation that we're, ODOT submits road construction stuff for I-205, or the construction that went around your house, or whatever else is happening on. Those are the variances that, there needs to be some evaluation of that, and that shouldn't be done by the Sheriff's Office. That should be done by the professionals that manage those kind of projects and the needs for that to occur. So that's our advocacy on it, and we would love to partner with whoever takes that over. So we have that notice along with them and provide that notice for things that are going on in the county, so that we have that information to respond to complaints when they do come in, and enforce that citation or that fee schedule when it's applicable, and work with when there are large-scale events that are being worked through for the county, if there are variances that could apply to those kinds of events, large mass gathering kinds of events, then we would provide information to help evaluate the need for those variances for those events. Much like the event that there was being planned for out of McIver Park this summer that got canceled, Vortex 2020 that got canceled because of COVID-19. That was being worked through the planning departments for that event, and they would have needed a noise variance, obviously, to work through that event. And we would have, worked with that, all the county departments working on that mass gathering application. So I'm happy to answer any of the questions anybody might have.
Actually, I agree with Paul. I don't think that all of these should be in the sheriff's department. I think the way to do it is somewhat like the code committee. So an applicant comes in for a variance, then you would have somebody, let's say, in code enforcement, planning, sheriff's department, because that might be communicated with, and then you distribute it to whom it applies to. So the sheriff, if it's an all-night party, obviously planning and code enforcement aren't there all night. So maybe somebody reviews it, okays it, and then sends it to the department that would be responsible for enforcing it. But I agree, it doesn't make sense for the sheriff's department to get into that kind of stuff. The question is where. And since we're full cost recovery, where makes a difference on what you charge for the application. So Sonia and then Paul again.
So I have a question. Not sure who this is directed to. It's probably to you, Shane. We had, don't know if everybody read their BCC emails, but we had a constituent from South County in preparation for today email us about the challenge that exists when there's a loud party, there might be some gunfire, and then the call to get a sheriff's deputy out, the challenges in getting a sheriff's deputy out, and then the code enforcement, well, that's the enforcement, that's the sheriff, and just the back and forth of that challenge. And the suggestion from the constituent is that we require the sheriff's office to go and respond. I'm just looking for, with this situation that we received today, what the comments are, or, this obviously doesn't fix the problem that we have with not enough deputies to respond to all the calls throughout all of Clackamas County, obviously, but just some thoughts about that issue or suggested solutions.
Yeah, I guess my answer would be I can't speak to that specific circumstance. I wasn't privy to that email or that information. I didn't have an opportunity to prepare for finding out what that specific response was about. But again, as I mentioned before, we're happy to partner when there's a public safety nexus. So if there's gunfire or assault or loud parties or drunk drivers being reported, it just depends on the priorities that are going on out at the time that call comes in. If we're tied up on some other thing, if somebody's been, major crash, a fatality, or, some other activity that we're stuck on and we can't get there right away, that's the balance that we have, that we constantly have to manage the calls for service and the priorities at the time with the resources that we have on currently to respond to those things. So, life safety is the number one thing. We're going to go deal with those first, and then we move down the list of, property and, other nuisance and livability issues. So it just depends on the information at the time as it comes in and the resources we have available to respond. We will respond, but we might not be able to get there immediately. And some of these things, by the time we get out there, they're done. They're over. It's, an hour and a half later, and that problem's, gone, solved. People are in bed and everybody's asleep. So it just depends on what's going on at the time for each circumstance.
All right, Paul, then Gary.
Yeah, well, this is great discussion. I guess at the very minimum, I'd like to get out of this today to take advantage, at least get some direction on how to take the steps forward. And you know, jokingly, I was going to say because Mr. Madcore is not here, we should put it in his office. But I thought maybe actually be in Nate Boderman's department, and let him be in charge of that. But I didn't want to. I saw that Gary put his hand up. I would like to hear what the administrator's idea is and how we take the next steps and figure out what department handles this, or maybe it's divvied up into construction-related ones versus loud parties or whatever it may be, or weddings or whatnot. So that's all I have.
I bet you that's what Gary's going to say. We'll come back to us with some ideas.
Brilliant. Actually, Stephen Madcore is in the attendees list if you want to bring him in, but that you don't have to. So I propose, commissioners, you direct staff, me, to work with the departments on this call to come up with a proposal for you. I don't know how much this costs to implement or what it costs now, and so we have to consider that as well, and you have to consider that. So no one should think because they're getting rid of something, they're going to retain the money they have to do that. So I need to know how much does it cost, who does what the impact is to staffing, and what are the best departments to manage it. So I propose you direct us to come back to you with that information. We're not going to solve it in 3 minutes, but that would be my suggestion to you.
I agree. Everybody okay with that? See heads nodding. All right.
Yep.
You have direction. Yes, Nate.
Quick clarification. So the consequence of that recommendation then, as I understand it, would be that the sheriff's office temporarily retains processing noise variances, and we wouldn't make any changes to the noticing at this time associated with variances. Is that correct?
I think Cheryl wants it, but
I just want to make sure the scope of what I'm bringing back to
question.
you is as I understand it.
Well, so I'll just say this, is that what's currently happening right now, or supposed to happen, is that when those leave the sheriff's department's desk, that those go to the clerk of the board. That's how it's going right now. And the clerk of the board notifies us or whatever related department to make sure it's cleared. So knowing that our long-standing wonderful clerk is retiring, unfortunately, I want to make sure that person and the staffing continue that practice in the interim.
Yes, Christina's the temporary clerk in the interim, so she will do that process for us.
Okay.
so we still haven't got Nate's answer. I think that how much time does it take to approve an app?
Sure. I think that's my answer here. So I have administrative staff, Sarah Comstock, that receives these online mostly applications. We have a link that people submit these online. It takes her to put this together, I'd say a staff time, probably an hour of her time to do this information. And it typically, it could take more, it could take a little bit less, just depending on the scope of, the research that needs to be done. And sometimes it takes a lot more because we're doing some public safety research about the request. But there is no current fee charged for that through the sheriff's office. It's all online, no fees collected for that. I'm going to have a second thing. Just are you voting or moving forward with any information on changing the subjective standard today, or is that all tabled along with where the variance is going to go for staff reports?
I would say we are changing the standard. That's no question. So that's behind us. The question is, where does it go from here?
Gary, who's the last name of Christina, the temp? I just want to make sure Comstock has that name.
Terwilliger.
Terwilliger?
Right here.
You're muted, Gary. Sorry.
Well, Gary, could we take that into the office? I mean, if it's an online thing and then distribute it to who it applies to?
I mean, we can work that out, what that means. So there's a less step for the sheriff's office to take. Yeah, we can work offline, Shane, on what that looks like. But Christina's on the line. Christina's on the call here. Christina Twilliger. That's right.
So we have two moving pieces. Number one, Nate's two issues that we're going to move forward. What's the next step on moving those forward? And then the variance piece needs to take a life of its own, like Gary said he would. So I guess how do we move the first piece forward?
Sure. So that is a code amendment. And so the next time you will see it will be first reading. And we can, the the language is already drafted. And so it's just a matter of finding some time to have a public hearing. And so we can certainly work with Christine in the board's office to make that happen. But I hope we could do that in fairly short order. So that's a first and second reading. And then it sounds like perhaps an upcoming policy session to deal with the variance issue and where those variances end up living. So we can certainly handle those on parallel tracks.
So I think you need a motion for option 1.
So moved. Any further discussion?
And
Second.
Oh, okay, so please poll us.
Okay. Commissioner Fisher?
Aye.
Commissioner Hubbardston?
Aye.
Commissioner Savis?
Aye.
Commissioner Schrader?
Aye.
And Chair Bernard?
No, I'm just kidding. Aye. All right, motion carries unanimously, and we'll get back to you on the second question. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, everyone. Okay, moving on to your next policy session. It is update on Phase 2, Park Avenue Community Project. We have staff from Transportation and Development and members of the Park Avenue Community Advisory Committee. So we'll wait a pause a moment while they are coming into the room. Karen, we'll let Karen kick it off. Karen, please keep your presentation to 15 minutes and then 15 minutes for questions.
Wonderful. And we do have a PowerPoint that was included in the materials. Is that something that, Christina, you run, or do I run that?
I can make it available so you can share your screen if you'd like to run it.
Okay, why don't I go ahead and do that? All set up. And so we do have Valerie and Anna. Great, I will go ahead. Good afternoon, Commissioners. It's wonderful to see you this afternoon. I'm Karen Burig, the Long Range Planning Manager at DTD. And I'm also the County Project Manager for the Park Avenue Community Project. So today we just have the 30 minutes to be able to update you on the Park Avenue Community Project. And I have today with me is Valerie Chapman, who is the chair of the Park Avenue Community Advisory Committee, as well as Ann Muir, who is the vice chair of the CAC. So I'm going to provide just a quick background before I hand it over. And so let me go ahead and I'm going to share my screen. See if this works. Okay. So today, as a part of the presentation, I'll provide just a quick overview of the project. Valerie will be able to touch on the Community Advisory Committee work. Anne is going to touch on the guiding principles that have been developed working with the community. Valerie will also touch on the most recent evolution of the framework plan alternatives. And then I'll wrap up things with kind of the next steps and the schedule. So as you may recall, I wanted the Park Avenue Community Project really focuses on that half mile around the Park Avenue Light Rail Station. One of the things I did want to highlight to you is that this project is aligned with the policy perspectives that are identified in the Performance Clackamas County Plan, and specifically that policy perspective of healthy and active lifestyles, guiding housing, transportation, and land use policies. And this project also supports the goals for more housing opportunities to ensure that fall under ensuring safe and healthy and secure communities. So I also wanted to note that the project really, while we have the half a mile around the light rail station, the guidance related to the development design standards are focused in the pink area around McLaughlin and the darker orange area around McLaughlin. So let's see. This slide shows you just a really brief history of the project going back to 2017. But I wanted to really highlight to you that, it's been a full year since we have been in front of you about the Park Avenue Community Project. A year ago, we came to you asking for your support for the appointment of the CAC members to the project. Since that time, we have met 13 times with the Community Advisory Committee. We've had 2 public open houses and workshops, and we've also had a set of specific outreach to the businesses in that area with the assistance of John Lagarza from Business and Community Services. So today is the opportunity for Valerie and Ann to share with you about the experience with the CAC. And one of the things that I did want to highlight is this is an update. Our goal is to come back to you in November with the recommendation from the CAC, specifically related to the development and design standards. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Valerie, and she can speak to the Community Advisory Committee.
Good afternoon, Chair Bernard and commissioners and county staff. And I want to thank you for having us here today. I guess what I would like to say going in is, first of all, just the experience has been very good working with the community. There were 18 members of the Park Avenue Community Advisory Committee to start with. And I want to say that at this time we have about 12 active members. So we have lost people over time, which is not unusual. We lost more probably than we would have if there had not been a pandemic and work issues for people and family issues going on all at the same time. We had, as Karen said, originally hoped to have our work done by July. So we are in our extra time now. We only missed one meeting, that was in March, and then in April we were able to move online. So we did have the one workshop with everyone, community being able to be present with us. That was in February, and that was the optimum way to meet. But that was the only one we could do that way. Right after that, everything sort of shifted in our world, as you know. And we had to start rethinking how we were going to do things. So the members of the Community Advisory Committee worked really hard to try to do outreach. We came up with a strategy of putting flyers to go out with the lunches that were served to young people out of Oak Grove School, that would advertise about our workshop and a survey that was coming up. We put up signs. We had help from the county. Thank you to Karen and Lorraine and Ellen, who helped us get signs that we then posted in our neighborhoods that also would lead people to the website and encourage them to take the survey. It's different than the kind of community engagement that we would have liked to have, but under the circumstances, we feel pretty successful about what we did do. We had 288 people respond to the survey, which is actually really good. And I think more than half of those people indicated as they took the survey that they were living in the area around that is under question around Park Avenue. The members have worked to engage all the way through, and I did want to say that we personally we did a lot of texting and phone calling and emailing, and really some of us I actually put mail and snail mail, put it out to try to get people to engage. So the grant that helped fund this project was really focused on doing engagement, community engagement. And I think we worked really hard to do that under circumstances that were not the best, but we did have a significant amount of input. So I think we felt pretty good about that. I do feel sad about losing any members of our community, but for some people, their work hours just changed, or their family obligations at home changed because of the pandemic. And they really had to withdraw, but they did it reluctantly. And we have tried to stay in touch with some of them anyway to see if we can get them to participate in workshops or whatnot. So overall, the experience of being part of the advisory committee has been very good. And I think we've been very supportive, so felt a lot of support from the county staff and also from the consultants at Sarah, who have gone out of their way to pull us together in some meetings And certainly with the grant management team, which Ann and I both participate in, we've also had that opportunity to help guide what comes up at the meeting and work on the agenda together. So it's been a good experience, and I think people have worked hard. I would be remiss if I didn't say that people are, getting tired. We've been, and looking, they're going to want to make it to the finish line and get this project to you in November, but it's been work trying to do it this way. So we want to have Ann, who's the vice chair, talk to you about the guiding principles.
Thank you, Valerie, and thank you for having us here and working on this. I wanted to just point out the obvious thing that the guiding principles are the bedrock of the project, and even though they seem more general, as once we get into a framework and whatnot, we can't do the framework without the guiding principles. So not only the guiding principles themselves and the words that we came up with eventually were the bedrock, but the process of coming through into creating the guiding principles was really a bedrock of the CAC committee, really understanding what they wanted to do and then bringing that to the community. So we kind of worked out in, so we would, the committee itself brought a lot of ideas of just what kinds of things they love to see. We had examples from all over the nation. Well, I think we even had international examples of what people love in communities, and some local ones too. And we put those all out and talked about what made them important to us. And then we tried to articulate some of that as a committee. And then a subcommittee took that articulation and wove it a little tighter. And we brought it back. And then that's what informed the work, how we put together the first workshop in February, which was really very successful, well attended, and a way then that the community could interact with the images and descriptions that we had come up with. And then in that larger interaction, then the each of the ideas grew and were more well articulated. And then that went back to the committee, and we spent two different meetings where we broke down into small groups and really talked about what was the basic message we wanted, and then working on the language to make sure that the language was absolutely consistent with what we were thinking about. And so what happened over all of those, that was a long time too. It seemed, I think some of us thought, whoa, are we never going to get through the guiding principles process? But that the time it took and the back and forth from committee to smaller committee to community to committee, with the really able guidance from Sarah to help us think about, articulate what we were saying in language that made sense in the project, as it were. So that's the guiding principles which you have on your site. I'm not going to go through them given our time, but I think you've probably all looked at them already. And they really have been, we go back to them all the time as we're working through the framework, and we go back and say, well, wait, does that really match what we were saying? So this whole process has been excellent, and an important way to get the community to be able to build this project. So I really feel that with this process, it is a community-built project. Thank you.
And so I'm just going to ask Valerie to touch quickly on the next couple of slides, because I do want to leave opportunities for the commissioners to ask questions.
Right. I won't go into the whole process we used for the framework plan. I will just say that it was essentially the same as what Ann described around the guiding principles in our back and forth with the members of the community, with the Sarah team, with the county, and with the input. In this case, what the input that we got was from the survey that we had. That was the bulk of the information that we had, and we really did press to get a variety of different communities to respond to that survey so that we would have the information. I will say about the plan, this is a vision, so we, in that, we have these different elements, as you can see on the screen, that that kind of give you clues to what's on the plan as it's put out. And, in doing a vision as we did, where we wanted to talk about where crossings might be, where connections might be into the neighborhood, where we might want a community center, and all of these kind of things. I was really concerned myself that we were going to be able to do this, doing it online, and absolutely, it was very impressive. The Sarah team did an excellent job of translating things and creating an interactive way for people who were at the online workshop to actually engage with the work that was there. And they have been very adaptive. There's some of us that can be pretty tough about knowing what this community is like and what they want and what they don't want. And they have really responded and framed the options for the vision in a way that I think the community can come on board with. I don't think I want to say too much else about that. I don't want to take up all the time. You can see that we're working through, we're just entering into the development and design standards, which is not the most exciting part to talk about code. But of course, the necessary part of getting a plan in place that will actually have the ability to put it into place in the future as development comes into this area. Anything else you would add to that, Karen?
And well, so with that, I guess I will just kind of close it out. We are, as Valerie was saying, we're starting the code element of that, and with the goal of really having just a few more, I believe 2 or 3 more CAC meetings, and bringing a recommendation to the board in the November timeframe. So with that, I'll stop sharing my screen and allow for the conversation with the board.
First up, Paul.
Yeah, I want to thank Valerie and Ann for their work. I've sat in on some of those meetings where I could. They've done a great job considering this COVID thing, which has really messed things up, I think, in a lot of ways. Something that I have mentioned at the tail end under comments at the end of the meeting, just concerns that I have, not criticisms, but just concerns, and not of the process, but just the situation. Number one is that the attendance has just, and I don't mean attendance of the members of the committee per se, but more from the community. And I think Valerie accurately did. I think that much input on the open house survey is great. So I don't want to diminish that at all. I'm just concerned, just reliving what occurred on that TGM program years back. And I know that our goal was to really buckle down and do a lot, but again, COVID got in the way. So that was one. And the only other one is the affordability aspect, which did not get, I don't think, as cemented into the guiding principles, perhaps. It did in a way. They used the word accessibility on one of that as it relates to housing. But Jim, I don't know if there's any update, but as you know, whether it's the North Main project or it's your facility or the facility that's on your old site that you sold, the business affordability is just as much, if not more of an issue in the future, to make sure that the rents for those businesses are affordable. And as I listened to the consultant in one of the presentations, I was, he did make a case that, there's got to be a profit in there, and I understand that. But somehow we've got to be as mindful as possible, because a lot of these structures that are built with businesses on the bottom or business opportunities on the bottom, a lot of those sit vacant today. Whether it's lack of exposure or whether it's affordability. I'm gathering it's the latter, it's affordability. But I know that housing and the price of housing for our constituents is a big part of how many and why this area suffered the most amount of displacement in Clackamas County and then any other, and saw rent increases higher than anywhere else. You know, granted, rent prices went up everywhere, but that's about it. Other than that, I think the work looks good. I'm excited to see what comes out of it, and hopefully that there's widespread support for this, and we don't see a surprise in the end. Thank you.
So I had my hand up, and then Sonia. So I just want to mention that first off, we can't let the virus control our future. This could be years, literally years of delay. So we have to do the best we can to get the information we can to make the best decision. But one thing I think is also true is that we have to think about the investor who buys a piece of land, develops a site, it has to pencil out. And so we have to have flexibility. We have to have proper height. We have to have the facilities in order to facilitate investment. So all those things are really important. And by the way, I have not seen a single redevelopment in the Milwaukee area that didn't struggle to get the retail open. I know that the facility on my site, my former property, still has not filled the retail, and the one on Main Street in Milwaukee took years, and I'm still not sure it's done, but it takes a while. And a lot of that is the build out. They just build a shell, and then somebody has to come in and invest in the redevelopment of that shell. But anyway, thank you, Sonia.
So Ken, we really love looking at you walking around in your neck. I'm sorry, it's just it's making me giggle a little bit. So I'm going to try to stop laughing. And what was that?
I just couldn't sit still any longer, sorry. And I had to switch over to my phone because the iPad died.
No, it's all good. I just couldn't let the moment pass without saying something. You know me. And so Karen, this is probably more for you, and you're going to really get what I'm saying. I just get tickled when I look through this, all the values and the guiding principles and all of the things that when we were in Decatur, Georgia, and we just talked about how you build community and you build healthy communities and active lifestyles, and not just for the physicality of it, but for the connection of people, the community connection, which is so important.
Well, do you want to come back tomorrow then?
So, hey, Jim, we can hear you. Okay, for the connection for mental health and connectivity. And, you know, I know that COVID it's just really hard as far as we think, well, how are we going to look at imagining our communities and creating our communities? But the things that are in here with the guiding principles and, you know, with gathering spaces and with multimodal, and I mean, all of these key elements are good with COVID. I mean, I think of some of where do you go when you can't be right with people? You need to go to spaces where there is some space to be and to connect, even with your immediate family in a more open area with ways to move safely and comfortably. So I just really appreciated it. And gosh, how long ago was that we went to Decatur? It seems like forever ago.
It was like a year and a half ago. And
yeah.
So, and I agree. And just as Anne had described, those guiding principles did emerge from the community. And really a driving factor has been about making the area more walkable. And that's, and for all reasons. And this really is that opportunity to be looking at both land use and how transportation access is in a community. So I did also want to just touch really quickly on a couple of points that were brought up. I did want to reiterate, we've been working really hard. We have concerns about the existing businesses as well. And we've been working with a group called MISO, as well as our Business and Community Services Department. They've gone out and they've spoken with the business owners out there to really understand what they need. And so included in your materials was a business community investment strategy, which kind of had a suite of different actions that will need to take place as change happens in that area to really respect those existing businesses. We've also had meetings with different developers that are considering that area and trying to fold in what their concerns are. And so, and we also, I guess the other thing is that I think our consulting team really understands the challenges faced by the retail right now, and some of the recommendations that are emerging are about not necessarily requiring retail uses on the bottom floor, but active uses. So, but with that, just a couple of final words. I'll leave it to Valerie or Ann to, if they have anything to say.
I just, thank you, Karen. I just wanted to, just for a moment, Commissioner Savas has brought up the affordability, and I just wanted to say that we have had some really robust conversations around that, and we agree about the need to maintain affordability, to not displace businesses or residents, and so we're in agreement on that. The difficulty comes from the word affordable. That for some people, when they hear that word, what they think of is low income subsidized housing. And so when you're talking in the community, and I live right in the heart of this, if you start talking about we're going to build, affordable housing close to people, they have visions of something that we're not talking about. And so our choice of the words accessible and diverse were an attempt to kind of say, yeah, we need that, and we're trying not to just trigger the community with words that we might not have time to explain. So I just want to honor that, because we do agree with you, Commissioner Savas. It's the word and trying to figure that out in our community. Other than that, I just thank you for letting us come and have the opportunity to share. And for any other questions, I believe you all know how to find us, and we know how to find you. So thank you very much.
I just want to add, Ann and Valerie, thank you very much. When we built the North Main project in downtown Milwaukee, and affordable housing was a dirty word. It meant all the criminals were going to move into downtown, and in actuality, it was the bankers up the street. It's the mechanics on McLaughlin, the car salesman, and all those other people who just don't happen to make $100,000 a year. So it is a very balanced discussion. I would say that it's really housing prices for everyone, because there will be affordable units or low income units and high income units and retail or active, all that stuff. That's what everyone wants, and it will occur over time. So thank you very much, Ann and Valerie. And then Paul, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to share, I won't say it's trivia, but just this conversation, and Valerie, did raise a very good point about the word. And I just thought she'd be interested to know, and maybe those in the audience would be interested to know, that when this came up at C4 a couple of years ago, we just did basically a straw poll. How many people around the table at C4 supported affordable housing and moving forward with that? And just a few hands went up, not very many. And then we asked the question, how many of you support housing affordability? And virtually every hand went up. So it's the sequencing, and you're right, there is a stigma with the word affordable housing, and housing affordability was the way that we were able to navigate and move forward at C4 with attention and focus on housing, especially with the rate of people that are falling into homelessness and what's projected to fall into homelessness. So our concern about, I think everyone would be excited to hear that maybe, they'd be able to afford or need an income of $100,000 a year to afford housing in an area. But as you know, there's not a lot of people in that area that have resided there for years and years and years that have that kind of income. And so we need to be sensitive to those folks. And the fabric of the community has a lot to do with the people that are there. And we need to make sure that they can stay there. And I think that's our intention collectively. And to be sensitive to that, make sure that of the mix, that there is housing that's affordable in the end. Thank you.
Thanks. I see Dan Johnson just logged in. Did you want to say something, or is he just logged back out?
We need to move on, Chair.
All right. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Gary?
All right. The final policy session today is Clackamas Broadband Exchange, United States Department of Economic Development Administration grant proposal. We have the staff from Technology Services, Dave Cummings and Duke Dexter, to present. We have 30 minutes, 15 minutes to talk, and then 15 minutes for questions. Dave, are you kicking it off?
Okay, I'll kick it off. This is not the Birdman. This is Dave Cummings. That was a nickname I was actually given when I restored my '68 Firebird. Paul knows all about that. In keeping with our approval to go ahead with the CBX, I have Duke Dexter here today. We've been approached by City of Sandy and SandyNet to apply for a grant to provide high-speed internet services, which our backbone does, up to 200 businesses throughout the county, anywhere off of our backbone. I think it's approximately about $2 million that we would like to get. And I'm going to have Duke, that's my project manager over CBX, explain what that is. Go ahead, Duke.
Thank you. Commissioners, thank you for your time today. So back on June 30th, we came before you and we had presented 2 grant opportunities, one with the Oregon Broadband Advisory Committee and then the other one with the US EDA grant. At that time, we had envisioned our grant to be a little bit different. At that time, a little bit different. We've had 2 subsequent conversations with the EDA, and they said now their focus is on something much more different. It's about job creation, job retention, and more or less investment within the business community. And so with that, they weren't necessarily going to provide support or funding for a fiber to the home or to a residence type of grant. And so we swapped up. And so in conversations with the City of Sandy, what we've kind of come up with and what I want to bring to you today is an opportunity to offer up a business class internet service throughout Clackamas County built off of our existing CBX network. And so Dave was right. What we would like to ask for is approximately $2 million. And what we anticipate with that is that we'd be able to connect around 200 businesses within Clackamas County. And the way that would work out is kind of with the past agreements we've had with the City of Sandy, the money would fund new equipment to provide that service, but as well as fiber for the lateral drops to the businesses. CBX would own, manage, maintain the fiber infrastructure, and then the City of Sandy would own the equipment and then also provide the service. They would also handle all customer contracts, any kind of customer relations for customer requests as far as new service levels or if they're having any kind of issues. And at the same time, they would handle all invoicing. So what we've done is we've started to put together all of the information that we need to be able to provide for this grant. One of the items that I included as part of our packet is a 5-year what I'm calling an income statement. And so it's kind of a rough idea of what we think customers or businesses would sign up for this service. And then kind of the profitability of that service. But I think there's a great opportunity out there for this. I think it does a couple main things for Clackamas County. I think it provides a on the or off the shelf business class ISP service that is not available right now. And what I mean by that is 1 gig, 10 gig services are available within Clackamas County, but you have to call up and individually work with a vendor, potentially Comcast, CenturyLink, maybe one of the local telcos to actually get to that level. We will be able to advertise a 1 gig symmetrical service for $195 a month. And we would also offer a 10 gig symmetrical service for $1,550 per month. We don't think that a 10 gig service will be taken, that there's a high demand for it, but it's a nice marketing piece. It actually is. There will be some businesses that will want to sign up for that service. And so I think with that, in the 5-year income statement that I had provided, I think we show that after year 3, it's profitable, and then 4 and 5, it is self-sustaining. Again, we are not asking for any general funds to move forward with this grant opportunity. CBX would supply any needed funds for the grant requirement. There is a 20% grant requirement, and CBX would contribute that through salaries and fringe. And yeah, and I think that it's a service that could help Clackamas County grow if people are moving out of downtown areas and moving more into the suburbs. This could be an opportunity to draw some businesses and some other professionals that work from home into Clackamas County. With that, I'll open it up for questions.
Okay, Paul.
Yeah, Duke, appreciate the presentation. I'm just going off of memory, but at one of the last EDC meetings, it may have been the last one when you presented there, I remember seeing a map that you had shared with your presentation of the county, and I recall seeing Oregon City and Oak Grove and the McLaughlin Strip in there, and a lot of the county. So my question is this: if let's just say that my business is on the corner of Concord Avenue and McLaughlin, and I got a business right there. Are you going to be able to connect me for $190 a month?
$195, yes. So the way we're looking at it is it'll be a first come, first serve for the business class service. And we believe that we can extend with lateral drops for about $2 million to 200 businesses. So again, about $10,000 a drop, right? So we feel that we can do that within Clackamas County off of our existing network. Now, with that said, we went through and we actually have a map, and I can provide that as an updated map, but it shows our network, and then it shows how many businesses are located within 1,000 feet either direction of our existing network right now. And we have 4,584 businesses within basically 1,000-foot distance either side of our network. And so there's a huge opportunity there to be able to hit, my assumption is that we would hit more than 200 businesses.
Okay, so my question is, when you say drop a line, you're gonna we don't have fiber going down McLaughlin right now, right?
Oh, we have sections going down McLaughlin. We do.
Okay. So we have the fiber there to drop from.
Yes.
Okay. And so you're estimating. So are you saying that I didn't follow you, and I'm sorry for not. I'm trying to track this. What you're saying. So are you saying that they need to be clustered together, or the projects need to be clustered together, regardless where they are geographically?
No, they don't. So no, they don't necessarily need to be clustered together. Now, is it less expensive if 3 businesses in a row take the service? Absolutely. But no, they do not necessarily have to be clustered together.
Okay. Great.
All right.
That's all I have.
Ken.
Needless to say, I'm 100% on board. I think this is exactly what we should be doing. I'm glad to hear that Sandy Net will partner with us to do this. And I am prepared to put a motion on the floor as soon as the chair is prepared to accept one.
I just want to say I wish the 195 would have been available to my business when I was in business. So, wow, that's a
Yeah.
hell of a deal. I think when I closed my business, they wanted me to pay them $10,000. So anyway, I didn't. Paul, and then Sonia. Let's get through this. Come on.
Yeah, well, we got plenty of time. We're on time. This morning, I wasn't feeling very good, but I wanted to just mention something that Martha had touched on and was relaying, and that is, when it comes to grants and going to NACO, and whether you're in a rural caucus or in other caucuses, or just discussions, this is it's been a big issue way before COVID. I mean, broadband service around the country is a big issue. And what it gave me the perspective is that how competitive it is, right? And when I don't know what the demographics need to be, because usually there are, for federal grants, for example, there are, low income areas or demographics play a large role, and typically dollars go towards those low income areas, and USDA and a number of factors that roll into that. But it is surprising sometimes and kind of overwhelming when we realize how well off we are in Clackamas County when we look at our demographics compared to other parts of the nation. So I guess my question to Dexter in that context is, what's the criteria look like, and what makes us stick out or shine in our application?
So first and foremost, so part of it is they do require a 20% match. If you looked at our match documentation, we're looking at being able to contribute through our resources, through our salaries, almost $1 million. And so one of the main pieces on that is going to be that we're going to be beyond the 20% match. So we're not going to be asking for up to 80%. We may only ask for 60% of that $2 million to be able to expand our network. And then I think the second piece out of that is, part of the requirement for that is you do need to get letters of support from businesses, which we are in the process of kind of doing right now. And so we're hoping to be able to collect somewhere in the area of 20 letters of support from local businesses that would be signing up for this service. And in those reports, or in those letters of support, we will be highlighting whether or not it'll create jobs, retain jobs, or actually increase investment in the area. And so I think those are big pluses, and so that's what we're working on right now. But I'm gonna be honest with you, it's a sharp timeline. So this was an existing grant, but then part of the CARES funding, they dropped in $1.4 billion into this part of the CARES funding, and it's kind of a first come, first served thing out of the EDA. And so, again, we've had some very good conversations with our representative, and we're trying to be as prudent and diligent as we can to get it in ASAP. And so once we, along with our consultants, feel that we have a great application, if you guys approve us or authorize us to move forward with it, we're going to turn it in as soon as possible. And we're really hoping that our narrative of adding a service that saves businesses money and at the same time increases their ISP service can create those jobs, can create those investment dollars within Clackamas County.
Well, I'm excited. I'm ready to move forward as well. I'll let Ken make the motion. I'm not going to jump in front of him, but I think any business would be foolish not to jump on it.
Is Martha trying to ask a question?
So I'm looking at this, the match documentation and the totals by state staff, and there are 3 new hires. Is that hires for the county?
That is undetermined. It might be only 1 for the county and then 2 for Sandy Net.
Okay, but that would be covered by the grant.
No, their salaries would actually be covered by the revenue generated from the service.
So you're assuming that the revenue will, I'm just curious about that the revenue will be high enough to pay for people's salaries because we'll be adding people.
That's correct. 3 new hires.
But you don't know.
we'd be looking to hire kind of the week 4. So the way it kind of works out is if we are awarded the grant, then we have 3 years to kind of do this build out to 200 businesses. Month 4, I believe I put in when we kind of assumed that would be our first customer that we would sign up. We would hire an admin assistant to be able to handle the contracts coming in, getting them signed up, getting invoices, all of that kind of set up. And then in year 2 or month 13, we would actually hire another employee to be able to go out and help do some of the installs, handle some of the customer service calls. And then I think it's, my apologies, I think it's like week 20, we add on another employee there. So in the end, we would add a total of 3 employees. It has not yet been determined. I mean, the admin assistant would actually go to SandyNet, but the other 2 potentially would be with CDX or with the city of Sandy.
Okay, but you haven't clarified that yet. We don't know.
No, not yet.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Sonia and then Ken.
Thank you. So this looks like a really exciting opportunity. I'm just curious. So this morning we talked about the importance of doing some community outreach, looking at a business plan, really looking at the feasibility of the county becoming an ISP. And I understand that this is a partnership with SandyNet to get service to, or better service to businesses. And it really looks as if this is exactly the type of partnerships that we really want to foster throughout the county. I'm just curious how this interrelates with the other effort that we're looking at, where the cross points, is this just complementary? I mean, that's how I kind of see it, but I would just like you to speak to that.
Absolutely. Both of them are actually complement to one another. I think you hit the nail right on the head there. SandyNet is willing to take this on. One thing with business customers is they tend to be a little less, the only word I can think of is needy compared to a residential customer. And so they do have some concerns that if we did some form of a fiber to the home or fiber to the premise type project, if we're serving customers in Wilsonville or West Lynn, Lake Oswego, that's a good distance from the city of Sandy. And to provide that customer service could require quite a few new employees for them, and maybe even a remote location somewhere else. Fiber to the business, kind of what this is, doesn't require that much customer service. And so they're willing to kind of take on that task, if you will. If we proceed down the road where we want to say, we want to get a new fiber to the home or fiber to the premise to everybody, potentially that overwhelms the city of Sandy, and we would need to do, maybe CBEX would need to do something. Maybe we need to partner up with somebody, another ISP. There could be a multitude of ways that we would handle that.
Ken?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I would like to thank Commissioner Savas for the courtesy. I move to approve option 1.
Second. Any further discussion?
I'd like to compliment the staff on their work for this and their aggressiveness in going after this. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Tina, please poll us.
Okay, Commissioner Fisher?
Aye.
Commissioner Humbertson?
Aye.
Commissioner Savas?
Aye.
Commissioner Schrader?
Aye.
And Chair Bernard?
Maybe. All right, so that's a yes. Great, thank you guys very much. Good luck and bring the money home.
Absolutely. Thank you so very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Gary.
Thank you. That is all, Chair. We're done. You're done for the day.
All right, thank you. See you tomorrow, I suppose.